Hi, I'm Mark Madison, and I'd like to welcome you to The Beast in the Garden, Mountain Lions and Men, informal conversation with author and journalist David Barron. We're very fortunate to have David with us this afternoon here in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. David Barron has reported on science, medicine, technology, and the environment for National Public Radio for more than 15 years. His work has received numerous honors, including on 3 occasions the annual Journalism Award from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Barron's radio reports have aired worldwide. He's written for the Boston Globe and Outside, and he's produced TV reports for CNN and other programs. And what we'd like to talk with David about today is his newest book, a very interesting book called The Beast in the Garden, A Modern Parable of Man and Nature. It's an interesting examination of the interaction between 2 large predators, humans and mountain lions. And David, welcome to the National Conservation Training Center.
Thank you,
Really glad
Mark.
you could come out here.
I'm thrilled to be here in West Virginia.
And probably the first question we usually ask authors is what possessed you to write this book?
Well, actually, writing the book stemmed from work I was doing for NPR back in the mid to late 90s, because back then I was specifically one of NPR's 2 environment correspondents. And I found myself doing a lot of stories about wildlife, about deer, beavers, coyotes, grizzlies, and I found that all of these stories shared a common theme. These were not stories about wildlife dwindling in the face of human development. Rather, these were stories about wildlife populations coming back, moving in toward our suburban areas while our suburban areas move out, and a growing conflict as people are moving out and wildlife are moving in. And whenever I would do these stories, I would find the same political dynamics replicated. You'd have these communities bitterly divided. You'd have one camp saying, the animals are out of control, they're becoming pests, we need to hunt them, trap them, move them out. And the other camp would say, no, it's not a wildlife problem, it's a people problem. We've moved into their habitat and we should leave these beautiful creatures alone. And you end up with stalemate because no one's talking to each other. And the more I looked into the issues, the more convinced I became that really the truth was far more complex than either side portrayed it. It is both a people problem and an animal problem. And if we're ever going to solve these problems, we had to begin with a rational discussion. So I thought someone should write a book that can start this kind of dialogue, and no one else was doing it. So I thought I would give it a try.
Well, that's great, and it's a really fascinating book. I just finished it last week. We'll run a picture of it in a little bit on the camera here, and I'd also, as I'm asking you some questions about the book, I'd like to encourage folks in the audience, if you'd like, please do call in at our 1-800 number if you have any questions about mountain lions, human interactions with large predators. David would be more than happy to answer those. And actually, the book was so good, we had a few questions come in via email.
Great.
Even before the broadcast. Now, the first one might be a little tricky.
All right.
Somebody emailed in a couple days ago and wanted to know if you know the largest mountain lion ever captured.
The largest ever captured. Well, for a long time, the number 1 in the Boone and Crockett record books. It's since been surpassed, but for a long time it was a lion killed by Teddy Roosevelt in 1901 in western Colorado. That one was said to have weighed 227 pounds, although Boone and Crockett is based on the size of the skull. That I think is, I know it's been surpassed somewhat, and I can't say that is the heaviest, but it's probably close. You'll see references often to a 276-pound lion killed in Prescott, Arizona, sometime about 100 years ago, but I don't find that credible, and I've actually talked to other people who've looked into that account, and that one, we don't know this many years later if it was true. But the Roosevelt one, 227 pounds, I think, is credible.
And you mentioned Roosevelt a couple times in the book, actually.
I mentioned him many times.
Yeah. He was an active mountain lion hunter, was
he? He took a couple of mountain lion hunting trips, and he wrote a lot about lions. And I do use him as a theme in the book, in part because he really helps to show how our ideas about conservation have changed so much in 100 years. I mean, the fact that Roosevelt in his time was a great conservationist, a lot of environmentalists today, I think, really would not consider him an environmentalist by today's standards. And we have, of course, this rift between conservationists and preservationists. And I think that helps to explain a lot of the problems we're having in these disputes over wildlife today. Because there are a lot of people who think hunting is just wrong, and a lot of people who think hunting is anti-environmental. I don't feel that way, although I'm not a hunter myself. But a lot of these debates really come down to, is it ever okay to kill an animal? And if we're not going to kill them, how are we going to manage them? And those are really unanswered questions, I think.
Right, and some of that ambiguity comes out in your book. Let's talk a little about the narrative in the book.
Sure.
It takes place in Boulder, Colorado, and it opens up with a mountain lion death, right?
Right. I structured the book really as something of a murder mystery, and a number of reviewers have likened it to a true crime novel, and it is sort of that, because the book opens in January of 1991 with the discovery of a body. An 18-year-old who had gone missing behind his high school in Idaho Springs, Colorado, which is about 25 miles from Boulder. And a search party was sent out. 2 days later, his body was found in fairly gruesome condition. Right. And the immediate thought was this was a homicide. But then the cat, the cougar, was spotted nearby, and the cougar was shot, and it was quite clear what had happened. This mountain lion, which was perfectly healthy, it was not rabid, it was not starving, had killed and consumed a very healthy, full-grown young man in broad daylight behind his high school in view of an interstate highway. This was the attack that was never supposed to happen, because until that time, mountain lions were said to be nocturnal, timid, elusive wilderness creatures that avoided humans and avoided cities and towns. And there certainly were attacks on record, but they always seemed to be explainable by extenuating circumstances. It was a rabid lion, or it was, the victim was a young child, and that you can sort of understand. But what happened to Scott Lancaster is we're now seeing with increased frequency across the West. I don't want to exaggerate the risk, but we are now seeing with far greater frequency this sort of thing happening. And so the story that I tell, I start with the ending. I start with the death, and then I back up 3 years, and I show through telling a story of what happened in Boulder as the lions returned to a new landscape with new attitudes among the people, how the lions changed their behavior, and I believe it helps explain how that unprecedented attack took place.
Yeah, like you went back and set the context. Talk a little about Boulder. What context was set up with that particular community that caused a cougar attack?
Right. Well,
be possible at least.
Boulder, I'm sure many of your viewers know, is one of the most environmentally progressive cities in the country. It's a college town just about 30 minutes from Denver, set right up against the Rocky Mountain foothills. The University of Colorado is there. And Boulder, back in the 1960s, long before anyone ever talked about suburban sprawl, Boulder was already concerned at what was happening as residential development was taking over the landscape. And Boulder, being very progressive, back in 1967, passed a dedicated sales tax that gave, I think it was 4 cents of every $10 in sales went to specifically to buying up open space. Wow. And so Boulder started to buy up this green belt, and within 20 years, Boulder surrounded itself with parks and open space land spanning an area greater than the island of Manhattan. And this was all, of course, ranch land where there had been hunting and where the land was actively used. But Boulder turned it into parks where there was no hunting. The land was essentially given back to wilderness. The wildlife came back, which is what people wanted. First the deer came back. Then the deer moved into town. Boulder had 1,000 deer living within city limits. And then the lions came back. Lions eat deer, so the lions moved into town. And that began then because Boulder was very pro-lion, and that meant, in the eyes of people in Boulder at the time, leave the lions alone. We don't want them, not only do we not want them shot, we don't want them harassed. And after all, the history books tell us mountain lions are virtually harmless. But when the lions started to first hunt deer in people's yards, then started snatching dogs from backyard dog runs and porches, and then started chasing joggers and eyeing people as prey, it was pretty clear that things had changed. And it was a short time later that there was this fatal attack not very far away. And I believe that lion that killed Scott Lancaster probably came from the Boulder area.
Yeah, as you talk about the mountain lions coming back, appearing on people's decks and so on, another character enters into this. Was it Sanders? Was that
Michael Sanders, right. Well, it's a remarkable story. I mean, I was astonished when I was looking, as I say, for a way to get at these broad themes of the new relationship between people and wildlife, but I didn't want to write a book that was some kind of academic treatise. That's not me. I mean, I write for a lay audience, and I figured the best way to get people to read the book was to tell a good story. And so I spent a year looking for the story to tell, and I found it in Boulder. I came on scene almost a decade after the story had happened, and I was astonished that no one beat me to it, because it's an amazing confluence of events. Not only of course, the shocking death that occurred, but in the years immediately prior to that death, these two scientists, Michael Sanders, who at the time was a wildlife biologist with Boulder County's Parks and Open Space Department, and Jim Halfpenny, who is a well-known tracker and author of many wildlife books, who lives up in Gardner, Montana now. At the time, he was working at the University of Colorado, and the two men teamed up to conduct a study of human-lion interaction in the Boulder area. And so they were asking the public to phone in sightings of lions, and they would go out and verify that what someone saw really was a lion, because you can't always be sure with these public reports, but they only counted sightings they thought were credible. And they noticed not only that over time were there more and more lions being seen as the lions came back, but they were being seen deeper and deeper in town, more and more in the daytime. The distance between the observer and the lion was shrinking. The lions weren't running away as quickly as they used to. They were being seen more and more in the daytime, and so they were documenting this process of habituation as the lions lost their fear of people. And not only were they not afraid of people, they were being enticed into town because that's where the food was. And they were arguing that in the media and to the Colorado Division of Wildlife that, this old idea that mountain lions are afraid of us and we don't need to be afraid of them may not apply anymore as the lions adapt to the suburban landscape. So it was really a remarkable thing that these men were on scene and documenting in a scientific way what was happening with the lions at this very time.
And there were two stereotypes you nicely point out that had to be overcome. You mentioned how Halfpenny and Sanders were trying to convince folks, including mountain lion researchers and wildlife biologists, that mountain lions actually could be dangerous to humans. Why was there such a strong preconception that they were harmless to people?
How do these ideas come about? Well, I think a part of it was it just was true. I mean, at least for 100 years, there had not been a single adult killed by a lion. With one exception. In 1909, there was a school teacher attacked by a rabid lion in Northern California. She survived the attack, but died of rabies a few weeks later. And again, that was one of those attacks, you could be bitten by a rabid raccoon. Sure. That doesn't mean that mountain lions will eat you. And, and whenever there were attacks, people seemed to, they didn't want to believe that the lion really intended to eat the person. And again, in most cases that were documented for 100 years, it seemed pretty clear the lion was not intending to eat the person, although there was a 13-year-old killed and eaten in Washington State back in, I think it was 1924. But again, there's a classic study that was done by Paul Beyer, who's at Northern Arizona University, came out in the Wildlife Society Bulletin, I think in 1991, chronicling, again, a century of lion attacks. In that entire century, except for the school teacher killed by a rabid lion, the oldest person killed by a lion was 13. And Paul Beyer concluded, adults, mountain lions don't prey on adults. 14 days after that study ended, his study ended December 31st, 1990, January 14th, 1991, 18-year-old Scott Lancaster is killed and eaten behind his high school in Colorado. And now we've had many more people attacked, and several more killed, the most recent being in Orange County just in January, where a 35-year-old man was killed and eaten, and later that day the same lion tried again and almost killed a woman who went riding by that afternoon.
The other stereotype that comes out is that's disproven even before humans are attacked, are that mountain lions are afraid of dogs.
Right.
That falls by the wayside pretty early on when the mountain lions come back to town. Explain that.
Right. Well, I did a lot of historical research, and reading folks including Audubon and Bachman's Quadrupeds of North America, that came out back around 1850 or so. And Roosevelt and all the naturalists of the time would write about the fact that mountain lions just always run from dogs. I mean, sure, there were a few exceptions, but they will run from the tiniest terrier. You could hunt a lion with a poodle, one person even said, a miniature poodle. Well, as that of course, that was in a time when two things were true. One was mountain lions were coexisting with wolves, and there is speculation that the reason lions did run from dogs is because they evolved with wolves, and wolves will kill lions. So they will run from a barking animal that looks sort of like a wolf. Secondly, people hunted lions with wolves, and so there were reasons. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. They hunted lions with dogs, and but when the lions came back to Boulder, the wolves were long gone. No one was hunting lions with dogs around there. They certainly do in other parts of Colorado. So the lions figured out that dogs could make good prey, and they started with miniature poodles, and very quickly worked their way up to black Labradors, German Shepherds. A Doberman Pinscher was attacked, and this too seemed to be a real shift in behavior compared to historical times.
How do wolves and mountain lions normally interact?
Well, not very well. They don't get along too well. I mean, we're starting to see this now with research in Yellowstone now that the wolves are back, also research up in Glacier and elsewhere in Montana. There are now quite a few documented cases of wolves killing lions, of chasing lions from their food caches. They don't, as far as I can tell, the wolves they don't kill the lions to eat them. I mean, they will kill them and then leave them. I mean, I think they're killing them because they are competitors. There are also cases of lions that have killed wolves, but they are certainly antagonistic. And so it's fascinating now that the wolves are coming back to see how they actually do interact.
That's very interesting. And usually the wolves drive the mountain lions out of their territory.
Well, it's hard. I mean, I don't know which is usual. My sense is that wolves pose a greater threat to lions than the other way around. But lions certainly do on occasion kill wolves.
Let's go back to the dogs and the people and so on. Basically what we're talking about here is what you mentioned earlier, habituation, or them getting more used to human environments, human modified environments. Now, when you began in the book talking about habituation, you actually began with grizzly bear 59, if I recall correctly, and tell that story.
Right. Well, just prior to when my book opens, which is in late 1987, Michael Sanders, the man you mentioned, who is really the main character in the book, he's the biologist who was witnessing what was happening to lions and saw what was happening before most other people did. Michael had been working up in Yellowstone as a biologist, and he was studying human-grizzly interaction. And one of the grizzlies he had come to know quite well, named Bear 59, back in 1986, ended up killing and eating a wildlife photographer named Bill Tazinski. And there was a body of experts put together to investigate that attack, and they concluded that part of what explained the attack was the fact that Bear 59 had become habituated to tourists, was not running away anymore, and therefore allowed Bill Tazinski to come quite close to her, and then at some point she did attack. And so Michael had witnessed this. He had spent a lot of time studying Bear 59, saw how there were all these tourists who would just watch her from the side of the road, and she got used to these tourists with their cameras just standing quite a short distance away. And that was not even the back of his mind. That was in the front of his mind when he shows up in Boulder and starts to see the same kind of interaction between people and cougars. And again, there was this sense on the part of the Colorado Division of Wildlife and others that cougars, no one had ever seen cougars habituate. They hadn't really had the opportunity because everyone thought cougars just stayed off in the wilderness. But so Michael, because of his experience with Bear 59, I think was really primed to see and to look for this this change in behavior in the lions as he had seen it with the bears.
Now, one way to measure habituation would be to radio collar cougars.
Right.
How come that wasn't done?
Yeah, this is a theme that goes throughout the book. It was a great frustration for Michael Sanders and Jim Halfpenny. They, the study they did was crude. They admit it. I mean, all they did was they asked the public to phone in reports.
Right.
Where did you see a lion? How did it behave? What time of day? You can criticize the study on many different measures. How credible were the reports? Are you measuring really where the lions are, or are you measuring where the people are? Because people are only going to see lions where there are people.
Good point.
I think their study is valid, but it has its limitations. And they said what we need to do is put some collars on these lions and really track them and find out, are we talking about all of the lions coming into town, or are there just a few of them that are particularly bold and most of them are staying on the outskirts? How close are lions coming to people? And they argued strenuously to the Colorado Division of Wildlife that they wanted permission to do this study. They were willing to look for funding elsewhere. But there was a history of bad blood between the Division of Wildlife and the city of Boulder. And this gets back to that old conservationist, preservationist fight. Boulder didn't want any hunting on its open space lands, which the Division of Wildlife was not happy about. And so Boulder was having problems with its deer. The Division of Wildlife said, you have a problem with deer? Let us open your parkland to hunting. Otherwise, we're not going to help you. This is your problem. And when the lions came back and the lions followed the deer into town, that was pretty much the Division of Wildlife's attitude too. This is your problem. Allow hunting. We can solve the problem. Otherwise, we're not going to give you permission to do this radio collar study. We don't think it's necessary. We know what the solution is. Go hunt the deer. Go hunt the lions. So Jim and Michael were never given permission to do that study. And after the book ends in 1991, 3 months after Scott Lancaster was killed in January 1991, the Colorado Division of Wildlife held a symposium called the Mountain Lion Human Interaction Symposium, because by then everyone knew this was a problem. And people came from across the West to discuss, all right, how are we going to deal with this new relationship between people and lions? And the number one recommendation that came out of that meeting, the Division of Wildlife, after the meeting, put a team together to decide how do we move forward. The number one recommendation was we should do a radio collar study of mountain lions on the Front Range where people are, which was exactly what Jim and Michael wanted. And to cap it all off, it's now 13 years later, they've never done it. It still hasn't happened, and I've tried to get the Division of Wildlife to give me an answer, and basically priorities changed, it fell by the wayside, they just never did it. And I think it's a real tragedy that it hasn't been done. And this is one of my pet peeves about wildlife management today. I think we need to change the way we fund wildlife agencies and change the way they act, because they are still hunting and fishing agencies, and they feel like, our constituency is made up of the people who pay for these licenses. But most of our wildlife problems today, or many of them anyway, are occurring in the suburbs where people aren't hunting and they don't pay. So we should make all taxpayers pay, and we should make fish and game agencies responsive to all of us, so that more of that money is going into this problem of what's happening on that urban wildland interface, because I don't think that's getting enough attention.
About halfway through the book, you've been talking about hunting and so on. We actually do get a mountain lion hunt.
Yes.
A fella comes over from California, the cat man, I forget what his...
Don Katner, right.
Katner, and that's a fascinating part of the book. Tell us a little about how mountain lions are actually hunted, which was new to me.
Right. Well, mountain lion hunting is normally done with trained hounds.
Yes.
And I said earlier that in the Boulder area they really weren't being hunted with hounds, and that's true, but this was an exception. Back in 1989, trying to get my dates right, actually it was early 1990, as the lions were now habitually eating dogs, a lion ended up eating a red deer. There was a game farm, a game ranch, in the foothills outside of Boulder, where some young men had decided they could make some money raising these European red deer. They could be sold for quite a lot of money as venison. And they had built an enclosure with a very high fence. Oh, of course, they didn't really think about that. Was to keep the deer in. It wasn't to keep the lions out.
Right.
A lion jumped over the fence, killed one of their quite expensive deer, and these men were livid. And they got permission from the Colorado Division of Wildlife they got a kill permit, because they had permission to kill that cat. It actually got complicated, but they hired a hunter named Don Katner, who at the time was living in western Colorado. He came over with his hounds, well-trained hounds, and he spent a couple weeks. And his job, of course, was not just to kill a lion, but to kill that lion. And it was quite fascinating to see.
The permit was just for that lion.
The permit was just for that lion. And he really came at it like a detective, because he studied the paw prints in the snow around the carcass of the red deer that had been killed, and noticed some imperfections in one of the tracks. And the lion had a scarred heel pad on its front left paw. And that was enough for him to go by. And so for 2 weeks, he was patrolling the roads in that area, keeping an eye out for fresh tracks and looking for the track of that lion. And eventually he did find it. And that also turned out to be the lion that was killing people's dogs in the area.
Yeah, what did they find out when they shot the lion?
Well, I mean, it was, again, 2 weeks that he was looking for this lion. And it was one morning, and he really, Don Katner really has the mind of Sherlock Holmes. I mean, he's constantly just picking up clues everywhere. And there was this one road he would drive where every time he'd go by this house, these two dogs would come up and bark at his truck. Well, that morning, one dog came up and barked at his truck. And he stopped and he asked the homeowner, "Where's your other dog?" And the homeowner said, "Oh, well, the dog's around here somewhere." Well, then the homeowner started to look for his dog. He couldn't find it. When Katner came back through a couple hours later, the homeowner said, "I'm not sure my dog's around." Sure enough, a little bit of investigating, Katner found lion prints, dog prints, a lot of blood in the snow, and then a drag mark going off. And so it was clearly the lion had killed the dog. It was the right lion. He set the dogs off. The dogs picked up the trail of the lion, and within a half hour or so, they had treed it.
Now, after they shot this lion and found out it had actually attacked the dog, did that change everybody's mind, and they decided you ought to start radio collaring these?
No, and it did not, and actually it caused a backlash. And I've been fascinated to see, I mean, these same dynamics are occurring right now. In Palo Alto, California, where just a couple days ago a lion was wandering downtown and was shot, and I understand now that the local police, who felt that their only option was to shoot the lion, have been inundated with hate email and hate phone calls. Tucson, Arizona, which has been having big problems lately with lions apparently stalking people in Sabino Canyon, a popular recreation area on the edge of town. They got such a backlash when they suggested they would go in and kill those lions. Again, these issues become so emotional so quickly. This lion, which clearly had not only killed the red deer, but had been killing people's dogs, when the public learned that this lion had been shot, there was the public reaction was mostly on the side of the lion, and it was, how could you kill this beautiful animal? We've moved into their habitat. And I feel sympathy for that point of view, but again, it's more complicated than that. And I think that what Boulder created, and Boulder has been learning its lesson to some extent, was, I would suggest, conceivably unprecedented in thousands of years in North America. And a lot of Boulderites said they were trying to get back to kind of a more Native American spirituality and a Native American respect for wildlife. Well, respect for wildlife, yes, but Native Americans hunted wildlife. Mm-hmm. Native Americans killed lions. For literally thousands of years, lions in the West and in the East too, when they encountered people, would probably have been shot at with bullets or shot at with arrows. But in Boulder, suddenly, they found people who didn't shoot at them, and in fact, all they would do is stand outside and take a photograph, like the people in Yellowstone who took photographs of Bear 59 before it ate a photographer. So this was a new landscape, and it really wasn't until people started to be threatened. It wasn't just dogs, but people, and then an 18-year-old was killed, that there was a change of heart. But still, today, if a lion is killed in Boulder, you can count on there being a lot of hate mail.
Well, and you start to ratchet up the tension in the book. As you approach the conclusion, a young woman who's out jogging, a medical student, is attacked but not killed by a wolf. Why don't you tell us that?
Yeah, by a lion.
I'm sorry, by a lion.
Yes, we're having the same problem.
Yeah.
Her name is Linda Walters. She was 28 years old at the time. Another athlete. I mean, a lot of the people who are having encounters with lions, I think for obvious reasons, are athletes because they're the ones out there exercising where the lions are. But Linda Walters was, in fact, she was a terrific cross-country skier who was all set to compete in the Calgary Olympics, except that she had a severe accident, and so she withdrew from the Olympics. But she was able to rehabilitate herself enough that she was quite a jogger, and she went out for her usual afternoon jog in the foothills outside of Boulder on a June afternoon in 1990. She knew that there were lions around. She had grown up in that area, and when she was a kid, no one ever talked about lions, but she knew lions had come back. She loved wildlife. In fact, she wanted to see a lion. She's out on her jog, just, tens of yards off a road in a little ravine, when she comes down a slope, and there's a lion across a creek. And her first reaction was, cool. And she stops, and the lion looks at her, and she looks at the lion, and she started to feel a little uncomfortable, so she yelled at the lion, and she threw a rock at it, but the lion didn't budge. Well, then she notices in her peripheral vision another lion creeping around behind her. So Linda, not knowing what else to do, starts scrambling up the slope behind her, throwing things at the lions. She climbs up a tree. The lions, of course, climbed trees, and they came after her. She stomped on the head of one of the lions to knock it to the ground. She climbed higher up the tree. The other lion came up after her. She snapped off a dead branch, fashioned a primitive spear, and starts jabbing at the lion until it backs down. And then, even then, her ordeal didn't end. The lions just lounged at the bottom of the tree. The sun was going down. She was screaming for help. She could hear kids playing in backyards, but no one came. No one knew what was going on. And she was convinced that as the sun set, the lions would come up the tree and eat her. And what saved her was that while she was clinging to the tree, a deer came down the opposite slope, and the lions suddenly perked up, and they decided they were more interested in the deer, and they ran off, and she got away. But that became a very high-profile event. She was scratched. I mean, one of the lions went up and dragged its claws down her ankle. It wasn't by any means a severe injury, but they drew blood, and this became a political thing because the Colorado Division of Wildlife, which was still trying to calm people and was still holding on to this old idea that mountain lions don't pose that big a threat, refused to call it an attack, and they called it an encounter, or I think an incident. And of course, Jim Halfpenny and Michael Sanders, who were predicting an attack, said, look, a mountain lion pursued her, drew blood, this was an attack. And it became kind of silly. But by then now the public was starting to see that maybe things have gotten to the point where we need to address this problem.
Raise an interesting question. Are women or are children more likely to be attacked by mountain lions?
Well, certainly children. I mean, most of the attacks have been on children. That was true in Paul Byer's work up through 1990, and since then too, I believe that most attacks have been on children. And women versus men, I don't know that there's been a real division that way, except many of the people who've been attacked have been on the small side. Barbara Schoner, who was killed in Auburn, California back in 1994, was relatively small. She was a marathon runner. She was athletic but small. Scott Lancaster was not a very big guy. He was about 5'7", fairly lean. Although I understand Mark Reynolds, the mountain biker who was killed in Orange County just in January, I think he was about 6 foot. So, but I think size, I think, does matter.
Are there actions that joggers take or other people take that causes lions to take them as prey?
Right. It's reasonable to suspect that the fact that someone is running could trigger the chase instinct on the part of a cat. So, I mean, we have seen now several people who've been attacked have been jogging, not all of them. I think most important, and the biggest bit of advice I give to people is most people who are attacked, and almost all who are killed, were by themselves. And I think, I don't mean to make people paranoid about lions. A lot of people go hiking and jogging by themselves in the Boulder foothills every day, and they come back alive. But I won't do it. If you're with someone else, you're far less likely to be attacked. And if you are attacked, you've got someone there to come to your rescue. And there are now quite a number of cases recorded where someone's attacked and another person comes along immediately, throws rocks at the lions, kicks the lion, punches the lion, and the lion gives up, because mountain lions are solitary hunters. I mean, there are cases where you may have a couple together, as in the case with Linda Walters, but almost always they're by themselves. If a lion gets injured when it's hunting, it doesn't have a pack to take care of it. So lions want an easy, quick kill. And once it becomes difficult, they will give up. And I think, in fact, that is the biggest lesson out of the horrible attacks in Orange County. Mark Reynolds was by himself. He was attacked by a lion, and he was killed. Later that day, this woman, Ann Yella, was mountain biking. She was attacked, but a friend was there, came to her rescue. Others came along. They were able to get the lion off, and her life was spared. So I think the biggest risk factor is being by yourself.
How do people drive off lions? Do they yell at them, throw things at them?
Well, any number of ways. I mean, the thing is, first of all, I mean, if you haven't yet been attacked, but you just are having a standoff, it's now pretty clear that just about every lion attack is predatory. Mountain lions do not attack to defend their cubs. They don't attack because they feel personally threatened. They attack because they want to eat you. So to avert an attack, you want to act like the aggressor. You want to convince the lion that it has to worry about you. So yelling at it, throwing things at it, staring it down. Sometimes you'll see people saying that you should look away, but that appears to be precisely wrong. You want to maintain eye contact. You want to tell that lion that you're the boss. Actually, there's an interesting, and of course you do not turn your back and run. That's the worst thing you can do. But
right.
There was an interesting case just last summer in Colorado. A mountain biker outside Golden, which is not too far from Boulder, who was being stalked by a lion. He got off his bike, used his bike as a shield. The lion kept coming at him. He was screaming for help. This went on for several minutes. The lion couldn't be dissuaded. He threw his water bottle at the lion. No one was coming. So he changed tactics, and instead of screaming for help, he started screaming at the lion. And that made all the difference. Now the lion perceived that he was taking the upper hand, and the lion backed down. So I think that helps to show that I'm sure it's not easy in an encounter like that to pretend you're not afraid, and in fact to try to make the lion afraid. But that seems to be the best advice.
Tell us a little about the mountain lion's physiology and so on. Why is it such an adept hunter and so dangerous potentially?
Right.
To
Well,
people, if it's in the wrong place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, mountain lions, like all cats, are hunters. I mean, they are obligate carnivores. They only eat meat. and they almost always eat meat that they kill themselves. There are a few cases that have been documented of them scavenging, but that's extraordinarily rare. They, in order to survive, they have to kill, and so their canines are, 1.5 inches long, and there are some who suggest that the canines of cats are designed actually to slip perfectly between the vertebrae of their typical prey and snap the vertebrae apart. I don't know if that's quite true, but certainly that can occur. Mountain lions will sometimes go for the back of the neck, generally on smaller prey, to crack the spine. On larger prey, they'll tend to come up and sever the throat. But anyway, obviously the teeth are extraordinarily big. The jaw muscles are tremendously strong. Mountain lions have retractable claws. When you see their paw prints, you will not see claw marks. But as soon as they open their paws, the claws come out. They do not have much lung capacity. They are not great runners. They are extraordinarily fast sprinters, so they can accelerate like that. But they really need to get fairly close to their prey. They are ambush predators, and so if you're out in an open area where there's no place to hide, you're not going to find lions. Lions are going to be hiding behind a bush or behind a tree, and generally will want to get to within 50 feet or so before they attack their prey.
What is their typical prey?
Typical prey is deer, at least in most of the West. Down in Arizona, they eat javelina a lot, but studies in Utah, in California, show that 80% of a lion's diet is deer. But they'll eat just about anything, as small as grasshoppers. They've been shown to eat, but they will also eat elk. They've been known to eat moose. They'll eat coyotes. They'll eat. A number of mountain lions have been shown to have a penchant for porcupines. They somehow flip them over and open them from the bottom. So they'll eat just about anything. And again, the remarkable thing is that until recently, they were believed not to eat people because they eat absolutely everything else, including other cougars. They are cannibalistic. Males will attack and eat the cubs of other males, and males will spar with each other over territory, and usually the victor will eat the vanquished.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, let me give you another email question that
Sure.
came in earlier. We get a lot of phone calls, almost all misdirected here, but people asking what to do if they've seen a cougar near their office or their house. They want advice, and that usually is better directed towards a state wildlife agency.
Right, exactly.
But are there some recommendations now that people have? If you're on your deck or something, what should you do?
Well, first of all, mountain lions follow their prey, and usually where you've got mountain lions, they've shown up because that's where the deer are. And there are people in Boulder who have a lion in their yard, and then you find out later they've been feeding the deer. And you have to explain to them, well, if you're feeding the deer, you're feeding the lions, and you're enticing the lions in. So first of all, you want to remove any attractants, which for a lion means anything that's attracting deer. If you are encouraging deer into your yard, you should stop it immediately. Don't feed the deer. If the deer are eating from your bird feeder, take down the bird feeder. And anyway, you probably should be scaring the deer from your yard. If you've got pets, you want to protect them. Don't leave your house cat out. Dogs, as Boulder has shown, even large dogs can make easy prey. And so in Boulder now, what's encouraged is if you're going to leave your dog outside, you should have a dog run that's got a top on it, because mountain lions can easily jump a 6 or 8 foot fence, and they will, to get the dog inside. And so now people are encouraged to have a fenced top, a good sturdy top, and then you can leave your dog outside. So if someone's having problems, make sure you're protecting your pets, not attracting deer. Keep an eye on your kids. The Colorado Division of Wildlife recommends clearing brush away from children's play areas so that there aren't hiding places for lions. Honestly, I mean, you probably have to clear the brush out for a long distance for it to make a big difference, but but don't leave your kids outside unattended if you know there's a lion around. And if the lion is hanging out, call your local official, the animal control officer or the state fish and game agency, and hopefully they will come out and investigate and maybe do some aversive conditioning and shoot the lion with rubber buckshot or something like that. Some places are now doing that.
So what's the future for human mountain lion interactions? It seems like there's more and more of them every year. We just saw one a couple days ago. And
it is happening more and more. And I think what I'm hoping to do with my book is to get people to be more thoughtful about this issue, because I think we've gotten into a mode of thinking that is ultimately detrimental. It's well-intentioned but detrimental. And that is people's immediate reaction, certainly environmentalists' immediate reaction when we're having these lion problems is, well, what do you expect? We're moving into lion habitat. They've got no place else to go. And that's only half true. We are moving into lion habitat, but we're enticing the lions into our habitat. And because there's all this societal guilt that we've taken over the lion's habitat, a lot of people don't report lion sightings because they don't want the lions harmed. When a lion is killed, as in Palo Alto 2 days ago, the public is infuriated. And what we're setting up is a situation where we are doing as Boulder did. We are encouraging the public and our officials to have a hands-off stance toward the lions, which is just setting up potential disaster. I think we should stop taking over the lion's habitat. We should carve out large areas of the landscape in wildlife refuges or national parks or areas of national forest where the lions will be left alone. Make sure that their populations will never go extinct. I'm all for that. But when lions end up in Palo Alto or in downtown Boulder or other highly populated areas, they need to be managed. And if we can manage them in a non-lethal way, that's great. But sometimes they're going to have to be killed. And it's been only 40 years since we've stopped bounty hunting of lions. It's astonishing. Back in the 1960s, there were still bounties being paid on lions all across the West. This attitude that lions are important, beautiful creatures that should be protected is incredibly new. And I fear could change if too many lions attack too many people. The public could decide, the old idea that lions are too dangerous and worthless and should just be hunted out, which was the view back in the 1800s, could come back, and I don't want to see that. So I think we need to be ready to manage people, but also those individual bad actors, those particular cats that are causing trouble, and either teach them a lesson or remove them from the population, or they're going to give a bad name to the species overall.
Speaking of names, a question that comes up again and again is, why the heck do mountain lions have so many names?
Right.
Is there a distinction between a cougar, a puma, a Florida panther, or are these just regional names for the same critter?
Well, we're learning more and more that there is absolutely no difference. I mean, puma, mountain lion, cougar, catamount, panther in North America all refer to the same species. There used to be a view that there were many different subspecies, including the Florida panther. But modern genetic studies suggest that really there is no genetic basis for distinguishing among any subspecies in North America. The Florida panther really is identical, genetically speaking, to the Rocky Mountain cougar, to the eastern cougars that used to be up in Maine. They're all the same. Why so many different names? It's, I think, really because mountain lions used to be so widespread, found from coast to coast, from Canada all the way down to Argentina. And so you had many different populations encountering the same animal, but not knowing it was the same animal. And so regionally, they got different names.
Well, David, thank you. This has been a great conversation. You you answered our last pressing question, and in a minute we're going to go out and show a little video about something you alluded to earlier. You were nice enough to not mention this, but Fish and Wildlife Service was actually actively involved in
hunting lions.
Yeah, in eliminating mountain lions
Right.
from many areas temporarily, as it turned out. And I've got a little film from 1950 I thought would be fun to go out on, showing the hunting of the cougar is what it's called, and we'll do that when we're done in just a minute. But it takes you back. It's interesting. In a few ways, it shows how you hunt with hounds, for one thing, something you talked about and is visually striking, but it also goes back to an earlier, and not that many, really one generation ago, when there was bounties, when wildlife management was largely construed as eliminating predators, and when there was probably ongoing positive or negative reinforcement that dogs and people were something to be avoided. So we'll show that in just a second, but I really wanted to thank you for your time out here. Thank you for answering all our questions we had about mountain lions.
My pleasure.
And I hope people take the chance to check out your book. It was really a pleasure, and I'd like to thank all the folks who took the time to tune in and watch this broadcast, and I hope you'll catch us next month when we have another Conservationist in Action. Thank you very much.